Hello, it's Pat Kirkman. It's Sunday afternoon, August the 21st, 2022, and I wanted to bring you down to the old Smithville burying ground to see the remarkable difference in the looks of the burying ground since our city crew members have been working there in the past week. As you can see, grass has been mowed, and you'll also notice a lot of leaves have been raked and picked up. I must say that probably in the 25 plus years that I have been in Southport and have been involved with the Historical Society and have been in this cemetery many times over those many years, this is probably the best I have ever seen it. And I go so far as to say probably the only time that I have seen it taken care of as it has been in this past week by the city. So kudos and thank yous and congratulations to Mr. Stanley, to Manager Hargrove, and to Superintendent of Cemeteries Kylie Barefoot for their leadership and for their persistence, perhaps, in working with the men who were out here. In fact, when I was out here Thursday, I actually saw 5 men working at one time in the old cemetery. And I must tell you, that is quite unusual, but quite welcomed. So as you can see, we are enjoying what the cemetery hopefully will continue to look like. Of course, we know that that's not always going to be the case because of weather conditions and time constraints perhaps on the crews that we have to work here in the cemetery. The old cemetery is historical, of course, having been the burying place for people who were around Fort Johnston as far back as the mid-1740s and 50s. The town was established in 1792, and when they established the town and set up the 100 lots that became the original part of the city, as well as now being listed on the National Register of Historic Places, that original drawing and layout of the town did include this burying ground. And that's probably the reason we have this old-fashioned name for it, called a burying ground rather than a cemetery, even though, of course, it's perfectly fine to call it the cemetery as well, was because back in the mid-1700s, it was that, and still is today, a burying ground. Now, the city owns the burying ground. It was a part of the city when it was laid out, those 200 and almost 50 years ago now. And we still have possession, of course, as a city of this burying ground. Now, of course, when people began to move here, and when people live in a place, they also die in a place. So there had to be a continued place to bury folks, and this was it. Until 1937, when the city opened and developed Northwood Cemetery, which is out on Fodale. And so that is the second cemetery that the city owns here in Southport. So if you have people dying, then you need to bury them. And even though this looks like a hodgepodge of stones and burial plots, there's actually a map and a grid so that you can basically find where folks are buried based on a listing of burials here in the cemetery that was done by the Historical Society in the 1970s. And then a few years back, I think around 2011 to 13, Charles Christensen and Martha Johnson took it upon themselves to again survey the cemetery and lay it out so that we could see exactly where folks are buried. Well, not everything is completely wonderful yet, but hopefully as the city becomes more aware of the importance of preserving this historical treasure that we have right here in our town, that we will begin to see more things done. For instance, one of the things here that you can see is certainly we need to have some trimming of these shrubberies so that that lost tombstone in the back there can be readily seen again. Even though the city owns the whole property, almost 3 acres, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. Back in the day when they were selling lots here, now this was back before the 1930s, and then of course it goes back as far as the 1800s, the early 1800s, as far as lots being sold here. A family would buy a lot. Now, a lot is an area that you bury more than one body in. That's a lot. So as we see here in this bricked lot, there are quite a few people buried here in the McNeil lot. A single plot, a single space for one person to be buried, is called a plot, P-L-O-T. So there's a difference in a lot and a plot. And some people are buried here who are the only members of their family, or more or less, I would almost say got buried here because there was nowhere else to take them at the time. We'll go around this tree here. We'll see one such burial, which is a plot, because one person is buried here in this area. Samuel Bond, buried here in 1851. So this would be just a place for one person or a plot. And then right next door to him in this wrought iron fenced lot is a family lot for the Price family. One of the things that we would like to see the city be able to take on is to repair some of the broken tombstones that we have. We don't have a vast amount, but we do have quite a few that need some repair, such as this one here. Right now, there does not seem to be budgeted money for repairing tombstones, but hopefully that will come in the future. This is what we call the centerpiece of the cemetery. This is the Brown plot, and as you can see, it was quite a grandiose burial lot for the Brown family. These stones that you see here are called table stones or chest stones. By the way, everybody, B-O-D-Y, everybody here is buried underground. So people are not buried in that brick portion of these burial sites here. That was just a popular way during that time of the 1800s at one time to have your grave site marked, because with a flat stone like this, and they are at least 6 feet long, you could put a lot of writing on it and describe the person who was buried there quite grandly if you wanted to. And these particular table stones, a couple of them do have a lot of information on them. So when you come out to visit the cemetery, you can come in and take a look around and read those. Then some of the other family members are buried over here in front of the table stones, all within the lot here. I will say too that at one time, for about 10 years or more, probably closer to 15 or 20 years, the Historical Society here in Southport took on this cemetery as a project because it needed rescuing. It had been left almost abandoned for so long that the Historical Society saw a great need to come, with the city's blessing, to come into the cemetery and began to do some work in here as far as maintenance of working on basically raking leaves, because it seems like leaves are eternal here for this reason right here, if for none other. We have a cemetery full of these magnificent live oak trees. Live oak trees are evergreen trees, and therefore their leaves stay green year-round, and they are a little different in that they do not lose their leaves in the fall, as most of the leaves that we see around do, but in the spring, that's when the new growth, the new leaves, will push the old leaves off of the limbs of the live oak tree. And what happens is, of course, they fall on the ground and immediately turn brown. So a cemetery full of brown leaves is usually what we see, except today I'm happy to show you that the work of the city over the last week has raked up a lot of leaves. Many of them have already been hauled away. Here's a pile that looks like they're going to get some attention pretty soon as they move these away. Now, they can't do all of the cemetery in 1 week, but they sure made a wonderful start on it. In fact, I would say it's probably three quarters of a way cleaned at this point. They came in with the lawnmowers, did some mowing, but as you can see, there's not a lot of mowing that has to be done, especially right here in the very center of the cemetery under the trees. There's more grass in the perimeter around the edges, and the cemetery is fenced in. It has a wooden fence all around it. But it is wonderful to see so many of the leaves raked up, because that usually does not happen. When the Historical Society took the cemetery on as a project in 2005 and kept at it for a long time. Some of you may remember Musette Steck. This was her passion while she was on the board of the Historical Society and president of the society. And the society also donated thousands of dollars to helping to upkeep this cemetery, which included having some experts come and show us the proper way to repair tombstones, the proper products and glues, and that's a real loose term, glue, but whatever product that is approved for the repair and the longevity of tombstones. So when a person bought a lot or a plot here in the old cemetery, as well as out at Northwood on Fodale, which is the second cemetery the city owns. By the way, John N. Smith Cemetery is a third cemetery here in Southport. It is not technically owned by the city, but it is a 503c nonprofit organization, and it holds many grave sites for our black community and has since the 1800s here. So here in our two city-owned cemeteries, when a lot is bought or was purchased, because they're no more for sale now, I understand, in either, I know not in this cemetery, and I understand that there are no longer available lots at Northwood, but you might want to check me on that if you want to buy one. When you bought a lot or plot, according to the ordinances, and that's the laws and the rules that we have for our city, in Section 5, you will see that there is no perpetual care. It doesn't come right out and say that, but you can deduce that by the fact that the city says in our ordinances, in our rules, that the city is only responsible for the common area of the cemeteries. That means the outside around the fence here, any area that is not designated as a lot or a plot. Now, for instance, right here, the common area would be between these two lots. But as you can see, that's a pretty narrow area there. But according to the ordinances, the city is only responsible for this part, because the lots and the plots are the family's responsibility. And according to our ordinances, the city does not, should not, and I understand now will not, or at least out at Northwood, they say, do anything to maintain a lot or a plot, because that is the family's responsibility. Now, of course, you're going to say, but look, somebody's been cleaning these lots, and you are right. That's the city. And the city was out here all last week mowing, weed eating, and raking plots and lots. So therefore, well, at this point, we are taking care of family-owned property here in the cemetery. So perhaps the future for our city-owned cemeteries could be the establishment of some perpetual care, which means that there will be funds to take care of a cemetery for as long as it exists. And this one has been existing already for a very long time. So if that happens, I think that would be a reassurance, especially to maybe some descendants who have ancestors here from 100 years or more, who may not even live in the area anymore, or who may not have anybody close around to take care of their family plot, that the city will do that, that the city will have funds to take care of that. And that is part of preservation. Of course, a large part of preservation is taking care of the maintenance in a cemetery, which means mowing and weed eating and raking and cleaning around the graves. But for the lack of a better expression, we're breaking our own rules when we take care of the plots here. So it's kind of dichotomy as to what actually is or is not, well, I don't want to say the proper thing to do, but according to the ordinances, what should or should not be done. Some of the burial spots here are very old, and for instance, this one that had a tree growing up in front of it for a long time that has been cut down for a long time as well. And this gentleman died in 1811. So, 1841. I would dare say there is no one left to take care of Elias Bell. And so it would be up to the city to or not to take care of this little spot as well. Down this way we have our newer, and when I say newer, maybe in the last 100 years, part of the cemetery. And it is has a little more greenery, has more grass to it. And these were the last burial lots that were sold by the city before they went out to Northwood in 1937. So we do very likely still have living family members here in town who have folks buried down here in this area of the cemetery. You can see back, further back a little bit. Of course, in the 1 week that the crews were working in here, they have not gotten down to this section yet, but hopefully, and looking forward to that happening maybe this coming week or sometime in the near future. And that this wonderful cleaning will be an indication of what we can do with our crews here in the city and be able to continue doing this. Look at this interesting fungus mushroom type growth that we have here in this tree. Don't ask me, I have no idea about that, but I'm sure some of you will be commenting with all sorts of good scientific information about it. So down here in the lower part of the cemetery, still needing some work down here. And as you can see, one of the problems that we have in this cemetery, because we have lovely trees all over it, are limbs that fall down out of those lovely trees on occasion. Sometimes it's because of a storm. Sometimes it's just because they gave up and decided they didn't want to be up in the tree anymore and just fell down. So that's also something that has to be done on a regular basis, is picking up limbs, small limbs, some big limbs. And the city is very good, or has been in my experience of the 25 years that I have been here and watching the cemetery. By the way, I live out beyond the cemetery here, so every time, or most every time I come into town, I pass by the old Smithfield burying ground. So I do keep an eye on it. And it has become something that I have been very concerned about, and have been expressing concerns to the city administration over the last few months. And hopefully we'll continue to do that until I kind of exhaust my possibilities as to what I feel like should be brought to the attention of the city administrators. And I'm doing this completely as an independent, for lack of a better word, project, something I'm doing on my own, even though I'm life member of the Historical Society and past president, board member for many years. It is not something that is a project right now, or what I'm doing endorsed specifically by the Historical Society. There is a myth in town that the cemetery is taken care of by the Historical Society. That is not true. They are not in charge of this cemetery. Even when we had it as one of our projects that we gave money and voluntary time to, we were not in charge or control of the cemetery. It has always been and will continue to be completely controlled by the city. So that's why I am so encouraged to be out here today to make this video for you so that you can take a walk through the cemetery if you are far away or for some reason unable to come out to the cemetery. By the way, it's on the corner of Eastmore Street and Rhett. As you leave town or going out toward the ferry, you'll pass right by it. Here's another large family plot, still waiting for the rakers, and I'm sure that they will be by to take care of this lot as well as they move through the cemetery. But it's such a wonderful improvement. I could not help but come out today and bring you through, let you see for yourself what absolutely can be accomplished by the city when the priority is put on keeping this cemetery maintained and looking good. It's also important because of pride of place. And I think most of us who live in and around Southport are very proud of the place that we live. And we want it to look its best. Not just the cemetery, but all of the city. And that's why the mayor has appointed an ad hoc committee to try to work toward establishing a commission for historic preservation. And we will see how that goes in the next few months. But for the time being, this is what we have. And I am very hopeful that this is a good re-beginning for the city in taking hold of taking care of the cemetery. I'm going to close by showing you the oldest tombstone that we have here in the cemetery. This one is very difficult to read. It's almost illegible now because it's been here since 1804. It's a stone for Captain David Hicks. Captain Hicks was captain on a seafaring ship that had left Rhode Island and was going to Europe. Captain Hicks became ill as they neared this part of the Carolinas, coming down from New England before they crossed over the Atlantic, and ill to the point of death. And this was the closest place, evidently, to where he died, to where they could bury him. So we have this small tombstone that commemorates Captain David Hicks in 1804 when he died and was buried here. I would say, and this is one of the things that I want to try to impress upon the city, and hopefully that we will have funds to be able to make this a little more special than it is right now. It's difficult to find it. It's on the walking tour that there's a pamphlet and also a you can listen to it on your phone, and it talks about this little stone, but it's very difficult to find it within the cemetery because it sits here kind of in the middle. Nothing special around it, just in a dirt area here. Musette, who I mentioned earlier, did put a couple of oval spikes on either side of it to kind of keep the lawnmowers maybe from tackling it back in the day when they were coming through here, because as you can see, it's kind of a wide open space right there, and it would be very easy for a vehicle of some sort to damage this old stone. So perhaps this will be something that the city will have funds and maybe a willingness to turn this little stone, this special place in the old Smithfield burying ground, where our first and the oldest stone is for Captain David Hicks, might turn that into a little more of a memorial area here and give a little more information about that. So one more sweep around, to say again, thank you to the city and to all of those who are working here last week and this coming week, hopefully, to complete the taking care of and the upkeep of the old burying ground that we haven't seen the likes of in, I'm daring to say, a quarter of a century. 25 years since I arrived here in Southport. I am delighted and so thankful that this is happening and that it will continue to happen is my hope. Thanks for walking around with me, and you will be hearing more about the cemeteries from Pat Kirkman.